There's a popular saying by a motivational speaker who will go uncredited, but the saying is, if you really want to do something, you'll find a way. And if you don't, then you'll find an excuse. This typifies the behavior of a lot of black people perfectly. Now, in the last week, what we've seen the typical white media generated anti-black violence narrative begin to crack. Hasn't crumbled, but is beginning to have serious cracks, and white supremacy is looking and going, how the hell do we super glue this thing back together again? In very short time, we've gone from the police are not to be touched. There is no killing of a black person that is too egregious, too out of bounds to be considered legal. Well, all the police have to do is say, I feared for my life, and he gets off the hook. We have gone from that to now they routinely, not in every case, but they routinely are now not only getting charged, but getting convicted. And it doesn't take audio, video, print out 10 witnesses and a personal confession to do it. So what's happening is the white media is understanding that the black media has had a real impact on this issue. And it's been the black media doing this. The margin of victory is slim. When it comes to talking about how black folks are going to get what's ours and keep what's ours, and the ones who are actually going to get things done, that margin of victory is razor thin. Consider this. In all of Dallas, you have a bunch of Negroes who would claim to be business people, though you can't tell by looking. A bunch of black folks who would claim to be successful, and if you ask them, are you about that life when it comes to black first, I'm sure a lot of black folks in Dallas would say, oh, surely me. You got a lot of black folks of means in Dallas. But how many of them could be bothered to take the money that they've piled up and actually use it to start doing media buys and to push back against the white media narrative that the police can do no wrong? None of them. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you've got millions of people and at least a few 100,000 black folks. But you don't have any who apparently could stir themselves, especially the so-called black business class, or the black folks in a higher tax bracket who could actually be bothered to do anything. Their conscience never seems to get stirred for any reason. It took Jason Black, who doesn't even live in Dallas. It took that brother to start putting up billboards taking the Dallas PD to task. And do not kid yourself, that was definitely a factor in the convicting of Amber Geiger. That was a factor because what happened is you saw that there was pressure being applied. The white media completely and thoroughly ignored Amber Geiger's racist text messages and her racist family members. They didn't make an issue of that. And that's the white media showing you who and what they are and in whose interest they operate. White supremacy is going to be going down with their flag flying high. That's fine, but it's still going down. The margin is razor thin. The majority of black people, and we need to be honest about this, the majority of black people are going to be completely and thoroughly worthless and useless when it comes to black empowerment. Too many black people have become accustomed to trying to live off of other people's contributions. As far as they're concerned, they're just going to be sitting back and somebody else is going to fight for their empowerment. Somebody else is going to fight for their prosperity, and well, however it shakes out is however it shakes out. We can't have that. Part of black empowerment is the establishment and the reinforcement of an iron rigid code of conduct. And what that means is we're going to be uncompromising about those standards. The black people who think that black empowerment is somebody else's responsibility and fighting for it is somebody else's job, those fools are going to be left open for white supremacy to take down because white supremacy has no permanent plans for any black people. The black folks who have this idea that apparently they can just go ahead and be completely and thoroughly foolish, they can engage in and reinforce lifestyles that undermine us and that take away from our power and our ability to build, these guys are going to get left on the roadside. And we have to make sure that it's understood that when we start talking about B1 as a club, well, part of being in a club is you got to pay your dues and keep paying your dues. You don't pay it one time and then you're good to go for life. No, not only do you have to pay dues to get in, you have to continue paying dues just to stay in. Just because you get in doesn't mean you have a right to stay in. And that's important. Because there's too many black folks who, as far as they're concerned, they'll be more than happy to tell you what they did 10 or 15 years ago. Ain't done a damn thing since, but they'll tell you something that they allegedly did a long time ago. And too many black folks are willing to accept that when it comes to politicians, when it comes to preachers. This is the reason why I have a hard time being able to stomach the black baby boomers. Why is it that we have idiots like John Lewis running around at this late date? Why the hell did you support this bastard and still supporting him? Well, back in the 60s, I don't give a damn about you trying to reclaim your youth. Which is what the black baby boomers are always trying to do. You see, white people have that luxury, black people don't, but the black baby boomers, truth be told, they grew up wanting to be part of white society. And they were willing to sacrifice their own children as human sacrifices on the altar of white acceptance. Well, Generation X, my generation, we decided that we were not going. But the problem happened to be we require institutions in order to protect ourselves and in order to promote our interests. Needless to say, the black baby boomers, as with practically everything else, they damn sure let us down on that front. You see, what happened in Dallas last week, that is a textbook example. That happens to be a microcosm of everything that we're doing right and everything that we're doing wrong. The growing, burgeoning resistance to white supremacy, this happens to be an imperfect effort, mainly because we're having to do this on the fly. This is what happens when people are trying to have some sort of revolution, and they're basically having to employ a series of tactics because they do not have a critical mass of resources yet in order to employ a greater, more aggressive strategy. Now, this is not to say that there are not strategies at play, but the thing is to make sure that the strategies have the right amount of punch. We have to accept the fact that we are in a war with white supremacy, and the white supremacy has been waging war upon us, and it's time for us to fight back. And you're going to have to go all in. Nobody else is making a contribution for you. If you think the revolution is going to be funded for free, you're an idiot, and we have no use for you. If you think the resistance to white supremacy is somebody else's responsibility and that your responsibility is basically to make excuses for what you can't do, we have no use for you. White supremacy understands exactly what is happening here. The thought leaders within the new voices of black media are giving you the playbook for how to take down white supremacy, and you're seeing tangible results. You're seeing actual tangible results. I have absolutely no interest in trying to figure out how black empowerment is going to be applied to every black person in America because, unfortunately, it's just a fact that too many black folks in America are not really interested in black empowerment. What they're interested in is shucking and jiving, and they're interested in goofing off, and that's what they're interested in. I'm looking forward and asking what's going to be the state of black empowerment 300 years from now. Where do we want to be in 3 centuries when Professor Black Truth is dead, buried, gone, and probably forgotten? Where are we going to be by then, and what are we doing now to lay the groundwork for that? China has a 200-year strategy. Did you know that whole Belt and Silk Road thing that they're doing? That's a 200-year plan that China's got in place. That's part of the reason why they're taking the long view. If they get some big concessions now, doesn't matter. If they lose some ground now, doesn't matter. The point is they're pursuing this strategy. That's what that for a lot of you who just don't understand how the real world works, that's what is meant when they say a 200-year strategy. If they say a 50-year plan. In other words, what is this objective or goal that we're going to dedicate ourselves to? That's what 50-year plan happens to be code for. It's code for we're going to dedicate ourselves to this. This is not something for the next 6 months or the next year. This is something we're going to be dedicating the next 2 generations to. When I began this process of attempting to reach out to my people over 12 years ago, there were very few people who were talking like this. And the reason why happened to be that there had been a long time, a very long time, of a whole bunch of foolery, coonery, and buffoonery that had been going on unanswered, uncontested, unchallenged. You had a few master teachers out there, but by and large, you had a generation, the black baby boomers, who didn't wish to hear this. They watched a lot of TV, a ton of TV. They watched a lot of movies. God knows they listened to a ton of music. They were living in a dream world. They were daydreaming and they didn't want anyone waking them up. Well, their daydream metastasized into Generation X's nightmare. And we have been doing the hard work of trying to push back the forces of evil. The margin of victory is thin because the number of black people who are dedicated to destroying white supremacy is thin. And we want to make sure that this time is not a matter of to the victors go the spoils, it's to the doers go the spoils. Now, ordinarily what happens is whenever you're trying to push any sort of social movement, any sort of political movement, any sort of nationalist movement, what you have is you have certain individuals who happen to be men of means, and they're the ones who back these movements because ultimately what they're expecting is that either A, this is going to materially benefit them and put them in a better position than they're currently in. And that's the most common reason. The American Revolution was not, no matter what white media tries to tell you, no matter what white Hollywood tries to tell you, no matter what white politicians try to tell you, no matter what lies white historians try to tell you, the American Revolution had absolutely nothing to do with morality. If it was about morality, then the very first thing that they would have done is to address the fundamental contradiction of slavery. How the hell are you going to sit here and say that the British have white people in chains politically, and you're not even addressing the black people who are in chains literally? So it's a lie, always been a lie. But as I've taught you, white media is all about deifying and mythologizing the white supremacists and their goals, putting it on a pedestal and making something holy out of it, sanctifying it, sanctifying white supremacy and its historical agents. But the American Revolution didn't have a damn thing to do with morality. It was about a bunch of slave owners who were trying to become kings in their own right. They wanted to become an ersatz nobility. Sure, they wouldn't have honorifics like Lord or Baron or Duke or Count, but they would have all the power that goes along with it. So you can keep the title, just give me the power. That's what the American Revolution was about. And so you had a bunch of slave owners who were paying taxes who wound up becoming presidents and secretaries of state. They became the rulers of a nation. And ultimately, through their influence, they became the de facto rulers of other nations. That's what it was about. Thomas Jefferson had no problem. George Washington had no problem taking the proceeds of their slave plantations, their privatized concentration camps, and using that money to fund their little revolt because they were expecting to get compensated on the back end. Now, that's one way to do it. But the other way that certain well-heeled individuals, or another motivation for them to fund revolutions, happens to be that they're very much ideologues. As far as they're concerned, they're not really worried about whether or not they get something material out of it. They're looking at this point and going, I want things that money can't buy. I want to shape the world and to know what the world is going to be even after I take my final breath. You see Donald Trump and a whole bunch of others pursuing that. The Koch brothers, well, Koch brother now, because one of them has now shuffled off this mortal coil and is roasting in hell. But you also got people like Robert Mercer. You got people like William Regnery, who funds Richard Spencer's little white supremacist operation. That's what these guys are about. They are about trying to shape the world even after they're dead. And so what happens is they make sure that they take care of individuals, especially in the younger generations who are going to be fighting for these ideals. We have to accept the fact that there are no black people of any means who are interested in actually pushing and promoting black empowerment. You take a look at the old dead black media. What were they doing? Because these guys, these guys are already keeling over. They just haven't had the good manners to go ahead and croak yet, but they're close to it. And what these guys thought was that they would start their little publications, and this was going to be their personal nest egg, and it would give them something to talk about whenever they were finally able to go to these white cocktail parties, these white cheese and croissant parties, and they would finally be able to tell white people, I'm a publisher, and that's to them, that's all it was. It was an opportunity to get into a higher tax bracket. See, the European understood that he could use race, specifically skin color, as a unifying principle, and the European desperately needed that. If you take a look at what the European had been before the Romans came along, if you look at what the European had become after the Roman occupation, then what you see is, yeah, as far as these guys were concerned, they desperately needed something that was going to get them on the right side of power. So what we need happens to be that there are going to be black people who have actually amassed some resources who are going to understand the necessity of putting them to work for their people. But that would require them to actually think beyond themselves. White supremacy thought very carefully about who it was going to put some coin into the pockets of, and to make sure that these fools that they chose would not be of any use to anyone, not even themselves. It would be one thing if you had a clown like Bill Cosby who decided that he wasn't going to do anything for black people, a couple of vanity projects for some school that gave him a degree that he, truth be told, wasn't qualified for, even honorarily. But he didn't even bother to try to protect himself. This is a guy who failed the evolution test. Part of evolution is you got to make sure you got defense mechanisms in place. He couldn't be bothered to do that. As far as Bill Cosby was concerned, well, he's just going to have his mansion and his white women, and, well, that's pretty much all he needed. And as it turned out, he needed more than that, but he didn't realize that until it was too late. It seems none of these idiots ever realize that. And that's part of the reason why I tell you we don't need them and we don't even want them. These will be the main ones telling us that, well, why is it that you're saying that we need to have our people in positions such as DA or our people in positions in police? That's because this is not only what makes it where white supremacy loses the enforcement arm that it needs in order to attack us, but it also makes it where we have the enforcement arm and we can go after them. That's the reason why. White supremacy is at war with us. And like in any war, there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. We've had a few good days, and that's usually how it works for any sort of resistance. You're going to have more bad days than good days. The question is, who's going to be left standing when it's all said and done? And you got to accept that responsibility when it comes to fighting any sort of entrenched, established, overwhelming power. The bad guys are going to have more good days than you have. The question is, are you able to outlast the bastards? Because the thing is, entrenched established power also happens to be fundamentally unstable. You just got to keep hammering away until the bastards fall. We've had good days, crushing Kamala Harris. And I believe we basically broke Bernie Sanders' heart. Pun intended. Those are going to be good days. You're going to have good days. You're also going to have bad days. Like when you have that bootlick palooza that was going on in the courtroom, you're going to have white supremacy having people, black people, standing who they got on the payroll or who they've otherwise promised something to. Get out there and perform for us, niggers. But you also got to look at things realistically. There's a big difference between a situation not turning out the way you wanted and also taking an L. There's a big difference. Believe it or not, and I know this is going to come strange to a lot of people, looking at things, I don't see last week as being an L. It damn sure wasn't what I wanted. But the thing is, I as a student of history and as a thought leader of black empowerment, one of the things that I got to do is I got to stand back and take the long view. Where is the trend going? When it comes to the enforcement arm of white supremacy, where the trend is going is it's going in the direction that we want. It wasn't easy. It's taken a long time. We've had some setbacks. We've also had some idiots. White supremacy has tried to win the news cycle and will try to win the news cycle again. They're in the wrong. They're being pushed back against hard. They know that they need the enforcement arm of white supremacy to be completely and thoroughly unquestioned. One of the main things we said that we were going to take away from the bastards is their legitimacy. We were going to take away the legitimacy of the enforcement arm of white supremacy. Because once people understand a person or a group or an organization or even an institution to be illegitimate, what it also means is that institution ought not to exist. So a large part of our efforts have been geared toward undermining the legitimacy of the enforcement arm of white supremacy. And as you can see, it's been working. Has it been working across the board? No, of course not. There's no such thing as 100% of anything. And while we need to be realistic about the situation that we're in, we also do not need to be defeatist. We have to be realistic. The overall trend is going in the right direction, but we got to keep the pressure up. We got to keep the pressure on the bastards. When you see them being reduced to having to pay some bootlicking mammies and some idiotic clown brother, the family of Botham John, to get out there and just bootlick it up for them, when they have to be reduced to that, when they're reduced to that kind of public theater, what that shows you how desperate they are. I've been talking about the last few years, how the white media has had all of these staged events. Like in Birmingham, you had the white female police officer who called herself taking a picture of herself holding a black baby after the child's parents had overdosed. And that her husband was reaching out to white media in Alabama and telling them, you need to run with this story. People need to see this story. I tracked the entire event, the entire timeline, almost to a minute-by-minute basis of how that fraud started. And how the family of those children took the white media to task and said, you're showing the children's faces and using them as props, and we ain't with it. And there have also been other incidents. It seems that there is no occasion where there can be some black people coming in contact with the police in a way that the white media thinks is advantageous to the police that they will not report on. Now, when it comes to black people taking the police to task, well, the white media, there's other things in the news, But when it comes to black children, there doesn't seem to be a bottom there. There's no low that the white media won't stoop to. It seems that there's never an event where the white media looks and has a skeptical eye and asks, where did this come from? They never ask that question because they were the ones who set it up. The enforcement arm of white supremacy works hand in hand with the propaganda arm of white supremacy. So, when it comes time to talk about Tammy the Mammy and the bootlicked bailiff, no, the white media is not going to be asking any questions. Nobody's going to be asking, wait a minute, this has never happened in the history of American jurisprudence. Isn't this just odd and weird? This has never happened in any of these other racially charged trials revolving killer cops. So why did this happen now? The white media is not interested in that because their job is to prop up, support, defend, and reinforce the enforcement arm of white supremacy. They understand exactly what was going on here. And when they were reduced to something like this, that says it all. What it says is they have lost control of the narrative. They've been reduced to these pathetic, blatantly ridiculous displays because this is all they can do because the public is starting to turn in the direction the black media is prodding them to go. And they also understand that the black media wants capital punishment for any police officer who harms a black person. If you harm a black person, the same way that they say, if you harm a police officer, you should get the death penalty. Well, if you want extraordinary protection under law, you got to accept extraordinary punishment under law. You want zero tolerance? You want any sort of harming of a police officer to carry a mandatory capital punishment sentence? Well, then when a police officer is found to have harmed a black person, that's exactly what they're going to receive. You must balance the taken with the given. They know where this is going. They don't have the ability to get out in front of it, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to manufacture some chumps to give them cover. But we're not going to let that happen. By we, I'm talking about those of us who are black first. It is not going to be the masses of black people who topple white supremacy. And we also have to get used to another reality because I've been trying to prepare the minds of my people for what is coming for a long time. If you think the last week, if you count that as being an L rather than being a disappointment from what we wanted, a watered down outcome from what we would have preferred, then you are not built for this fight. And you're probably going to be shedding all kinds of tears for what white supremacy intends to do next. We've had to, especially Jason and I, because of the fact that we're on the same wavelength about so many things, we've had to take a step-by-step approach to trying to prepare you for what white supremacy is going to do and for what your correct response to it must be. You see, we had to be very careful about it. We had these damn near knockdown, drag out arguments about whether or not the right time and place was to say, we have to let a lot of black folks just fall by the wayside. How many? A majority will have to. To have to tell the faithful just how bad the rot is. But here's the good news. Don't be worried about the majority of black folks who are going to become casualties of white supremacy's race war against us. These guys were not helping to push the wagon in the first place. These guys weren't going to bust a grape. That's why I put out that video essay that YouTube didn't want you to see. Did we lose soldiers or cannon fodder? I wanted you to understand that. This is not a matter of who's got the biggest army. It's a matter of who's got the most organized army, the most disciplined army. We can exercise disproportionate influence, but we got to all be on the same page and we all got to be pushing together. Black empowerment must be the epitome of groupthink. But first of all, we got to make sure that we firmly establish what's the right thoughts for you to have. Don't you ever go getting disappointed or downtrodden or demoralized because white supremacy decides to kill. That's what white supremacy does. The question is, what are we going to do to make sure that we protect the people who are actually going to get the job done? We are presenting white supremacy with a predicament that they're not going to be able to easily get themselves out of. And no amount of bootlicks on the payroll are going to be able to blunt our offensive. We are going to continue pushing for black empowerment, continue pushing for the punishment of those who commit anti-black racism. We are going to continue our efforts to bring down white supremacy and crush it to dust. To thoroughly and completely eliminate the system of goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that white supremacy gives to its adherents. This is an existential crisis that we are facing white supremacy with. And we are not going to allow them to bring in any bootlicks, to bring in any con men and con women who are going to try to claim to speak for us. We have to stand on our square, because last week shows you exactly what white supremacy strategy is going to try to be. They're going to try to get black bootlicks in front of the camera and say, these guys speak for black folks. They speak for black folks. This is the reason why Jason and I, we had to make sure that we were very circumspect about how we come to you with what needs to be done. Because we knew that when we started telling you that we cannot support every Tom, Dick, and Harry who's been harmed by some race soldier, we have to make sure that it's black folks who are on code. That was going to be something that a lot of you were not going to be going for because you wouldn't understand it. Nobody said that you do not call out a white supremacist race attack when it occurs. Nobody says that you do not continue your efforts against the enforcement arm of white supremacy and calling out the propaganda arm of white supremacy. Nobody said that. What they said was, we're not putting on the cape. And the reason why is you saw what's happening. A lot of fools think that they're hustling some quickie payout and that they're going to be using us in order to help put pressure on the powers that be. Go ahead and give me the bag and, well, dog eat dog world. And no, it ain't about all that. Because you got these clowns who, as far as I'm concerned, if I don't hear you say the words white supremacy, if I don't hear that phrase coming out of your mouth, if I don't hear you saying white supremacy, you're not getting my support. Yeah, well, Professor Truth will sit back in the cut and it's going to be a matter of, we'll see how this shakes out. And that's what black folks are going to have to get used to. You got to get used to the fact that there are going to have to be requirements for black support. You do not get the support of your people unless you're on code. And that means you're going to have to commit fully to black empowerment. You're going to have to commit fully to the destruction of white supremacy. You are going to have to make it clear that whenever a black person is harmed by some race soldier, that's white supremacy, full stop. You ain't talking no forgiveness. You ain't making no excuses. We demand the maximum sentence. But understand that a majority of black people are not in agreement with that particular message, because a majority of black people, as far as they're concerned, they don't even perceive that a race war is going on. White supremacy, as far as they're concerned, that white supremacy is something that happened to Botham Jean. White supremacy was something that happened to Walter Scott. White supremacy was something that happened to Rekia Boyd. White supremacy was something that happened to Akai Gurley. That's what they're thinking. Too many black folks are cowardly. Too many black folks are sniveling, and too many black people are thinking to themselves that somebody else is going to change that, and we're not. If you think that the mission of the B1 Brigade is to fight for you because you're too damn spineless to do it yourself, forget it. If you're one of these fools who every time we look up, what do I do? You're too damn stupid to be here. You know exactly what to do. The problem is you don't want to do it. What you're really saying is, well, I don't want to have to build where I am. I'll just join someone else's organization. Fine, then go ahead and join your local chapter of the NAACP for the next 5 minutes that those scumbags are around. Or if they're not in town, if they haven't set up a franchise in your spot yet, I'm sure you can find some other group of do-nothing Negroes. Better yet, go ahead and get involved in your local church. Pastor Pork Chop or whatever pulpit pimp happens to be propositioning your mother or your son or your nephew at your church, I'm sure that he'll be glad to have you put a couple of pennies in the till. But you don't come to me. And you don't come to black empowerment. The margin of victory is razor thin. We understand that. The bad guys are going to be pushing with everything they got, and we're going to be pushing back even harder. We have dedicated ourselves to the proposition that we must have our empowerment. Black empowerment is the fall of white supremacy, but you got to adhere to that code of conduct. And you got to call out the fools who ain't on code. There are a lot of casualties coming. You think the bloodletting by white supremacy has begun? It ain't even begun yet. White supremacy has not begun the process of trying to wipe black people out. Right now, there's just some skirmishes going on. A couple of pot shots going on. But I'll tell you right now, my mission is not to try to preserve every Tom, Dick, and Harry out there, because I'm looking at too many folks who call themselves black people and they're not doing what black people are supposed to be doing. Black people are supposed to be fighting white supremacy. Black people are supposed to be on code. You're not on code. You're not fighting white supremacy. You don't get my support. And no, I'm not shedding any tears when white supremacy finally gets around to you. And no, I ain't supporting you or your family when white supremacy gets around to you. White supremacy is a war with us. And there's only seems to be a precious few of us who get that. The most important thing for those of us who are black first, the most important thing that we can be doing is to be consistent. Our greatest single failing has been that we have been consistently inconsistent, saying one thing 1 minute, then another thing the next minute. 1 minute it's, we want justice. The next minute, forgive. You know, I don't even know if you need to go to jail. We've been all over the place. We say whatever the white person in front of us we think wants to hear. Because that's what happens when you happen to be a creature of subservience as opposed to a creature of self-interest. And a creature, an organism that does not serve its own interest, is an organism that will also not survive. But that doesn't seem to bother a majority of black people. Well, it bothers me, and it better bother you. We are going to have to make sure that we continue doing what we're doing, banging the drum, keeping up the steady drum beat. Sure, we're doing a lot of things offline, but the most important thing, people ask, what are you supposed to do? Stupid, you're already doing it. You support this message because the mission of the New Voices of Black Media, as I personally laid it out over a decade ago, to take control of the social discourse within the black community and to elevate the debate. Take control of the social discourse. When you saw that crap going down last week, what you also saw was a bunch of black folks saying, this is wrong, this wasn't supposed to happen, that family was off code. Yes, policing ourselves from within to make sure that these bootlicks, bedwenches, and con men are called out and it's understood. You do not do this. Oh, but this lawyer told me, no, you don't get to scapegoat the lawyer. The lawyer wasn't out there doing the bootlicking, wasn't out there doing that forgive crap. You were, and you'll be held accountable for it. You don't get to put that off on your lawyer. You ain't scapegoating anybody. Code of conduct is not enforced from without, it's enforced from within. And people need to understand that there are real consequences for doing things that paint a bullseye on the back of every black person in America. There are consequences that go along with off-code behavior. You don't get to do that for free. There's a price that has to be paid when you decide that you're going to go against the interests of the group. So for those of you out there who have been trying to find some way out of the fight by claiming, oh, I just want to give up after last week, you have very little vision. Unfortunately, there are a lot of, how do I put this politely, baby black empowerment types out there. These are not people who I would say are counter to our interests, but the problem is they haven't been around the block enough times. They, quite frankly, lack the ability to be able to take the long view. These are people who are very new to this, and many of them happen to be individuals who are looking for a way out of the fight. They either need to be quiet and listen until they have had it. When it comes to black empowerment, you're not going to be able to learn this and understand this in 5 easy lessons or in 5 minutes. Now, the people who have been around with me for the last dozen years, these people understand it because they've been here long enough to get the entire message. You're not going to get it from one video essay or even a series of video essays. If you haven't been following what I've been saying for at least 2 or 3 years, then you need to be quiet until you have. Either that or you need to dedicate yourself to getting on YouTube, and you can go ahead and listen to the video essays, even the ones that have been taken down. You can still find them. Just put in Professor Black Truth, and there have been a lot of the faithful who have re-uploaded the stuff that YouTube took down. And you go ahead and you listen to that, listen to Jason Black, listen to Tariq. You go ahead and absorb it and just be quiet for a while, because what's happening is too many black folks, they got itchy Twitter fingers. And they're very reactionary and very emotional and unfortunately not terribly cerebral. And that being the case, you don't need to be speaking. You don't know enough to speak yet. So you just need to be quiet and listen to those of us who do. But black empowerment, last week, black empowerment had a so-so week. There were some good things that came out of it, but there was also some bad behavior that blunted. This was white supremacy that pulled a Hail Mary. It's no different than a football game where you have a situation where a person who you thought was on your team fumbles the ball at the last minute. And instead of you having a blowout game like you were supposed to, well, you had one guy who was supposed to be on your team, but, well, it turns out that he was taking a couple of dollars from the other team, and they paid him to go ahead and fumble the ball because they didn't want to have a blowout. They didn't want for you to just run the tables on them. That's what happened last week. The thing is, white supremacy they only get to pull a stunt like last week. They only get to pull a stunt like that once. And because of the fact that they were so over the top, so outrageous, they just totally exposed themselves. You do something like last week, everybody's looking at that and going, man, that was weird because it's never happened before. And it's a matter of, well, you're not going to be able to do that again, so go ahead and tell yourself that, well, at least we stopped her from getting the maximum sentence. Yes, you stopped this one, but can you stop the next one, or the one after that, or the one after that? See, the big advantage of being an underclass is, since you've always had this long losing streak, losing is pretty much the default setting for you. So taking another loss is not the end of your world. See, black empowerment can hit or miss. White supremacy can't miss once. White supremacy cannot afford to have us setting any sort of precedent. When you crush a presidential candidate in a single day, that's precedent setting. When you force candidates to have to say reparations, you even got people at the state level talking about reparations now because we've stayed on our square. The black media has been out here for a decade creating fertile ground for the reparations issue. We've been out here putting a spine into a largely spineless people. We have been out here getting our people acculturated and normalizing the term white supremacy so that when you say it, instead of people going, oh, what are you supposed to be, some sort of Black Panther? Is that what you think you are? Now what's happening is you had Fox News going, oh, they're saying white supremacy and people are listening. Yes, in other words, policy is starting to be shaped. We made it where it's no longer a fringe issue. That's the value of consistency. So all the morons and idiots out there who have been speaking for the last decade saying, well, you still talking white supremacy. Damn right I am, because I'm normalizing the term. I am normalizing it so that they're hearing it every day. Well, you still talking about what the white media is doing. Damn right I am. Whenever this is a war. The white supremacy is not going away overnight. And that being the case, I got to face up to that reality. So I'm going to stay out here banging this drum. And you need to be out here sounding the alarm along with me. You guys are the force multiplier. We are crystallizing and we are now solidifying what constitutes on-code behavior and off-code behavior and what it is that we're prepared to do in relation to our interests. Do not ever let anybody tell you that black empowerment is not on the march and that we are not advancing. We are. White supremacy's pulling some dirty tricks, and they got plenty of bootlicks on the payroll to help them do that. You should pay that no never mind in the sense of morale. Of course, you got some clowns who white supremacy has as the judge or has as the sheriff. I mean, come on, these people have never reached out to us. They've never been on our freaking side. But the very fact that we put them in that position, that shows that even in our highly degraded state, with only a few nickels to rub together, and in comparison to white supremacy, we have, in comparison to that, no real power whatsoever. And yet, look what we've managed to do. We have put white supremacy in this desperate situation. That was an act of desperation that you saw last week because they understand exactly which way the trend is going. Richard Spencer talked about that. You would think this Richard Spencer should be the epitome of what? Me worry? Instead, he's looking and going, yeah, but which way is the trend going? Yeah, I know we got it all. We still got everything under control right now, but which way is the trend going? White supremacy, that's how they operate. They're looking down the road. See, while most Negroes are trying to figure out what they're going to do for the next week, white supremacy is looking at what's going to be going on for the next 10 years. And what they've seen is that the new voices of black media just won't stop. White supremacy relies on violence in order to get its way. And internally, inside the United States, that organized violence is carried out by the enforcement arm of white supremacy. That's the reason why white supremacy will confidently say, well, we're going to legislate the violation of your rights. And what are you going to do about it? Because you know that we have armed violence behind all of these white supremacist codes that we are legislating. You know we got organized violence behind it. And if you don't like it, well, we'll just send in the thugs in blue to deal with you. Are you prepared for the organized violence that we will bring to bear? Not yet. But not so long ago, we weren't prepared for the image and media violence of the propaganda arm of white supremacy either. And you see how we got on code about that. Family, I want you to take some time to actually assess what happened last week in relation to all of these other things that are going on. See the big picture. Take a step back and actually see it. See what white supremacy did. Take a look at your enemies. See what your enemy's reaction to all this is and understand things from his point of view so you can actually know, you can actually intelligently speak on what actually occurred. Because there's going to be plenty of other incidents down the road. White supremacy understands that we are building. They understand that we're mounting the offensive. They understand that we are putting their backs to the wall. And if a group of people who have been completely and thoroughly disempowered, completely and thoroughly left without resources, destitute, if they're able to do this simply through sheer force of will, you better believe white supremacy's peeing its pants when they start thinking about resources. When that group of people happen to be able to combine resources with their political agenda. The most important thing that we can be doing right now is being consistent with the message. When you see off-code behavior, call it out. When the new voices of black media summon you, you answer the call. And you don't make excuses for what the hell it is you can't do. Jason didn't say, well, if only somebody would sound the alarm in Dallas. He didn't say what if. He decided that he would do it himself. You saw what the result was. Any people out there who consider themselves to be black first, you're supposed to be on code 24/7. And you're supposed to be making sure that other black folks are on code. What is happening here, at some point, what's going to be happening is this show is going to be going on the road. This is going to be a matter of black folks everywhere understanding that black empowerment is on the march. B1 is on the march. But what is also going to be understood is that we make it clear to everyone. We know that the majority of black people are not worthy of this message. We have to be honest about the situation that we're in. The majority of black people are not worthy of this message. The majority of black people, simply put, are not worthy of black empowerment. Too many black people have made their devil's bargain, and they've decided that they're going to try to find a comfortable place under white supremacy. And that the more trouble we keep kicking up, they're going to have to make some of white supremacy's adherents uncomfortable, and they've already made up their minds they're not about to do that. In that case, they don't have to do that. But we understand exactly what the stakes are. We understand exactly what the price of failure is, and we're not going to lose. We're going to continue putting white supremacies back to the wall. We're going to continue making white supremacy off balanced, and we're going to continue to keep hitting them. We're not letting up on them. Ain't stopped in a dozen years, not stopping now. And any black people who have decided that as far as they're concerned, it's too much trouble to fight for their survival, well, those are the Negroes who are not going to survive because white supremacy will get around to them as it always does. And we're not going to be shedding any tears. We're not going to be saying, oh, what a shame. Oh, Botham John. Oh, we lost one of our good ones. No, ain't going to be none of that. We're going to be looking at this guy. We're going to be looking at it with a critical eye. We understand that white supremacy has compromised the black community down to the individual level. So yeah, we're going to be, when it comes to black empowerment, we're going to be analyzing people on a case-by-case basis. And that's going to make a lot of black folks uncomfortable because a lot of black folks are out here trying to perpetrate a fraud. As far as they're concerned, they don't have to be loyal to black anything. As far as they're concerned, this is all a game to them. Oh, I'm just trying to hustle, man, just trying to hustle. Well, we're not. We're trying to build. Because we understand that the razor-thin margin of victory is also the razor-thin margin of defeat. And in this case, with white supremacy on the march fighting a race war against us, defeat doesn't take the form of continued economic deprivation. It takes the form of permanent annihilation.